Hey, welcome back to another episode of a series where I built a real-time application using Laravel and Laravel Reverb. Or at least I'm trying to build one. As you remember from the last episode, I was struggling to get the relationships correct. The main reason for that was that I'm dealing here with a many-to-many relationship between basically one user model and itself. And on top of that, I've got the pivot model, and that pivot model has a relationship to a different model. And I struggled a bit wrapping my head around it because the real-time concept and the relationship itself with models was slightly different than I had in my head. But I've spent some time outside of recording, got it up and running, and I wanted to talk you through this in this video basically. So from our previous episode, I've not made a lot of changes, but enough to make it actually work, and they are significant. The first thing, as you probably still remember, if you look at our conversations table, one thing that's changed is it's now singular, mainly because it's not a real model anymore, but conversation became a pivot model. And it has the two foreign keys for the user model called user A and user B, which is fine. Next up, for our messages table, the only thing I did was, instead of using foreign ID 4 and passing in the pivot class basically, I just went with the conversation ID and the foreign ID method here. The reason is, I'm not sure if it was me and my setup or it's Laravel, but passing in foreign ID for a pivot table didn't produce this particular column name. But that's the only change we've made here. And then the two big changes happen in the conversation model and the user model. If we start with the user model here, the main thing here, as you will see, is I've changed the approach here. So initially I tried to create one massive inbox function and try to cramp in my belong to many relationships into it, but that didn't work. So what did we do here? If you think back, a conversation for us is a relationship between one user and another user, right? So we realized it's a many-to-many relationship between the user model and itself. And the first thing I did was rethinking what that means for me. That means that I have a belongs to many relationship of a user to another user, where I could be be user A, but then the same thing as the inverse also exists, where I'm user B. I'm basically the user B of someone else's conversation, basically a relationship. So I basically went ahead and set that up exactly like this here. And then I could add things that I did before already. So the other thing that I had to remember and understand and internalize is, I think in the previous episode I made the right assumption that if I'm looking for a list of conversations, I'm basically just looking at an inbox, and that inbox is basically a list of all conversations, so all relationships with the user from either user A or user B. So if I want to create my inbox, all I have to do is get all my conversations as user A and just concat them with the ones where I'm user B. And that gives me all the conversations. So me trying to bring this all together into one thing was just not the right approach, and that's probably caused the most headache. And then if we go over to the conversation now pivot model, So you can see it no more like extends the model class here, but instead we are using the pivot class. And that also means that if I want to have a custom ID on it, which I need later, I have to like set this to true. Because if we go into the pivot class here, you will see the incrementing is set to false by default. That's something I didn't do earlier. And setting this to true basically means that we now have a ID that's like incremented, and then we can go into our messages model and say, hey, we've got conversation singular ID that's belonging to this pivot model, and that ID is this one that we here set to true. And that makes this messages bit actually work. And then going forward, we also have to make sure that these two are not the inversions of the user-to-user relationship. I think that was also another mental issue that I had, where I tried to put the inversions of my relationships into the pivot table, which doesn't make any sense because it's the intermediate table and not one end of the relationship. So to still be able to like have a conversation and fetch it in a different way than using the user and still be pointing to the right users, I may change this to regular belong to relationships using user A and user B as the foreign keys. This seems to work, and I'll see further down the road if this actually is something I need or if I can like leave this out. So we've got everything sorted out now, and I've also gone and set up my seeder here and basically created several, like I've got a user 1 and user 2, and then I've got a conversation with user 1 as user A basically with a message assigned to this. And I've also created a second conversation with user 1 being the second user, and again a message. And I also created a reply where the second user of this, so here we are user B, but a user A replies as well. And basically this seeder creates a list of conversations. So if we now go back to my terminal here and then have a look at my seeding, you will see that it's finally going through. So basically now my setup is complete. And we can even go ahead and have a look here. Let me undo this. This is basically how I said I want to access my messages, right? So I've got the user getting the inbox, which will now return me all conversations that user 1 is involved in. I'm going to get the last conversation, which I hope will be the second conversation here, where I'm user 1 as user B. And if I then get the conversation, the pivot table basically, and its messages, I should get a list of reply and message. So I should get a list of 2 messages. Let's have a look. I need to save this and let's have a look. And if we go in, we get a collection with an array of 2, and we see hi user A, I'm user 1 as user B, and then we get the second one that says hi user 1, I'm user X as user A. And I think that's all we wanted to achieve here. In the next video, what I will do is I will start building out a little user interface that renders basically this conversation list. And for that, I'll most likely set up Laravel Inertia and Tailwind CSS. But for now, I'm just happy that I've finally finished setting up this relationships struggle. And I'm looking forward to go to the next step in the next video. See you all, and bye bye.